Hi everyone, welcome to today's Textile Talk. I'm Lucy Shaken. I'm SACWA's Communications Coordinator and your Textile Talks organizer. Textile Talks are presented by the International Quilt Museum, Quilt Alliance, San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles, Studio Art Quilt Associates, or SACWA, and Surface Design Association. We love bringing you these free programs every week thanks to the support of our sponsors and contributions from viewers like you. Thank you. If you enjoy Textile Talks, please consider making a donation at sacwa.com/TT support. And if you'd like to be on Textile Talks, SACWA is currently accepting proposals for our 2023 calendar. You'll need to submit by August 31st. All of that info is at sacwa.com/calls, and I will put both those links in the chat shortly. A few Zoom notes before we begin. This is a webinar. We can't see or hear you, but we can read your comments in the chat. And if you have questions during today's program, please type them into the Q&A function. If you have suggestions for ways we can improve or for topics you'd like to see in future Textile Talks, please let us know in the post-event survey. We have live captions turned on for this program, and you should see a significant increase in the accuracy of these captions going forward because, thanks to your support and the support of our sponsors, we've been able to hire a captioning service instead of relying on the AI-generated captions provided by Zoom, which are less accurate. You can turn these on or off by finding the live caption or CC button in your settings. For today's Textile Talk, we've partnered with the Schweinfurth Art Center to present Social, Cultural, and Political in Excellence in Fibers. So now I'm pleased to turn it over to Devana Robity. She's the Program Director at the Schweinfurth Art Center and the moderator for today's program. Welcome, Devana. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Lucy. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Devana Robity. I am the Program Director at the Schweinfurth Art Center. And to tell you very quickly a little bit about Excellence in Fibers, it is an exhibition that is in print curated by Fiber Art Now, and we are hosting the physical version of the exhibition at the Schweinfurth Art Center in Auburn. We also run Quilting by the Lake, which is happening right now in Syracuse. So that's also a program of ours. And what I really wanted to talk about today, we have three artists who are joining us, Adrienne Sloan, Tony Williams, and Gray Caskey. And what we see in juried exhibitions on a regular basis is that certain issues that are in the cultural consciousness rise to the top. And we see this in almost every juried exhibition. I'm always interested in tracking those trends. And this exhibition is no exception to that. And so I chose these three artists to speak to you about their work, and it provides a real time capsule on what else is going on. So I'd like to very quickly just share my screen and show you the exhibit installed. This is Tony Williams' piece, Black Gold, being viewed by some children who have some indigo dyed clothing on. So we really enjoyed showing them that work. This is Adrienne Sloan's piece installed. And here is Gray Caskey's piece, Truth to Power. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Adrienne to talk about her piece, Truth to Power. Adrienne?
Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here, and I was delighted to be included in the show and asked to talk a little bit about my work. Next. Great. So I have been over the years a really avid machine knitter. And I started off, actually, I'm going to give you a little bit of history just because it helps explain the piece that's in the show. But a very brief history is that I started off just knitting, seeing what the sculptural qualities of knit were possible and being so compelled by it that I bought a used knitting machine sometime in the mid-'80s and started making knit hats. That I was selling at craft fairs. And for a long time, I was, quote unquote, the hat lady. But in 1999, that studio burned down. And it was such a shocking experience that it took me a while to get back into doing it. And when I did actually set up another studio, this was the first piece I made. And This I made with yarn that had been rescued from the fire. I finished it on the day that gay marriage was legalized in Massachusetts, and it just made a connection for me that I hadn't had before. And I decided to use my work in a very different way. And so I've been using it for commentary on what I see around me, the political scene, and climate change and many other issues. The piece that is next, that is in this show, back one, please, was derived initially from this piece, which is called Cost of War. And this was knit linen bodies where I embedded shape in it, but you couldn't really see the shape because it was made out of fiber. Next. The shape of that one reminded me of a flag. And so I then made, thank you. I knit this piece called Faded Glory. This was also an anti-war piece, and it is now in the collection of the Fuller Craft Museum. Next.
Hang on one second, Adrian. Let me just reshare my screen really quick. I'm sorry to interrupt. All right.
Well, let me talk a little bit about the piece that's coming up, because that's the piece that is the one that is currently in the show at the Schweinfurth. They did a beautiful job of installing. I haven't seen it in person, but I can see that they did a wonderful job just by looking at the image. And what I did with this one is that I used the same pattern that I had used in the linen, but I knit it with wire. And because it was wire, it could hold its shape. So it's a very fine coated copper wire. And I made a pattern for the backside of the people. And again, because it's a wire, it will hold its shape. Each of the bodies is about 22, 24 inches wide. And it hangs from the ceiling, as you saw in the installation, and you can see here. Wire is very hard to run through a knitting machine, I have to say, because the knitting machine works on tension, and wire has no elasticity whatsoever. So for those of you who are knitters out there, I don't recommend it. I included women in this installation because the initial showing of Cost of War, many people came up to me, several women came up to me and said, women die in war too, and you should take that into account. And so I included women's bodies here. Next. That was part of a series that I did in using this kind of wire, which is kind of a telephone wire, I guess. Holding its shape is something you don't get so easily with wool or linen necessarily, but obviously with the wire, it was a little bit easier. And so this was when, during the Bush administration and the Iraq War was going on, and I was very affected by that. Next. Including this, I made this one, which a fellow artist named for me. She came into my studio and she named it, and I knew exactly that was the exact right name for this, Uncle Sam's Tea Party. Next. But when the Obama administration came in, I was really elated, and I decided to show it through my knitting. And this was a piece that I made that has quite a long story behind it, which I won't give you right now, but I will tell you part of it, which is I thought that Michelle Obama would look stunning in that at the inaugural balls. And I spent 2 months trying to see how many degrees of separation I was from her, and whether I could in fact get this in front of her eyes so that she could at least have an option to turn me down. I didn't get a letter from her office until months and months later, and it was just something like we'll keep your resume on file in case we would need to talk to you further at another time. So it was very disappointing, but not the inauguration, and I wore it myself that night. So that was very satisfying. So this is a different kind of wire. This is a Parawire, for those of you who are familiar with it. It's not, it doesn't have the plastic on it, but it is a copper wire. Next. I've used flags a lot because they're really iconic and you can make a lot of statements with them. And this one was in 2011. And I was teaching at Haystack at that time. And my students said, you really ought to put that on a postcard and send it to all members of Congress. And I thought that was an excellent idea. And I followed through and did that. And here are the postcards. It became a program called Lobby Congress with Art. Next. I have addressed other things in my work, including climate change. This is a piece from '09. And the following one next is another climate change focused piece that actually just recently sold. I was delighted to find out. Next. Again, flags. I've made 4 or 5 flags. I've knit 4 or 5 flags over this period of time. This one made a commitment to, from the last administration, to unravel all the way up if the last administration didn't leave before the end of the term. And in fact, what happened, I was doing these in public performances, public unravelings, and I also made a postcard of this piece, which I gave away to people who promised to write to their legislators. In fact, what happened with this piece is it was last installed just before closing down for the pandemic. It was last installed in the Massachusetts State House. You can see that picture at the bottom right. And it spent the quarantine there. And after much deliberation, I decided that I was just going to leave it as is and not unravel it all the way, in spite of the way I had been talking about it. It actually, I made a point of having that on view for as much time as possible throughout the 4 years of Trump's presidency, and I was fairly successful. Next. That is yet another piece I included here. I know you're a little overwhelmed with flags at the moment, but this one is currently on view through August 20th at the Fiber Art International in Pittsburgh, PA. It's called At the End of My Rope. Next. I've also been really, like all of us, issues of race have been foremost, and here's a piece that responds to that. I've expanded my toolbox and I've been quilting and doing other things, which you will see next. I have started being really interested in puzzles. I'm using them in 2 different ways. One is I'm using the existing puzzles and making new pieces out of them, but I've also been working with designing my own and laser cutting. This one, Colorline, is very new, with using fiber as well, kind of an iconic image from my work, which is the drips. But I've also, next, I've also had design puzzles that I have had laser cut to my specifications. This one is called, this is part of my Missing Series piece series. This one's Justice. This is, the pieces in the middle are double-sided with the Constitution on one side and the names of Black victims of police violence on the other. So it can be laid out in various ways. Next. Completely off topic with fiber, but in line with the things that I've been paying attention to and really involved with, is this puzzle piece. I include it just because it's part of an evolution of things that I've been doing. It doesn't include any fiber at all, but it is actually in my new show, which is in Watertown, Massachusetts. If you are local and in the area, the opening will be on Saturday. Next. And this is the last piece I'm showing you because I wanted to end on a kind of different note. I wanted to show you that there are many ways of including fiber with puzzles, and I don't know if I'm going to go on and explore this further or exactly where this is all going to lead, but this is the latest piece that's really hot off the press, and I had a really grand time doing it, as I have had speaking with you all. So I want to thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing the other two presenters.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. That was fabulous. Our next artist is Tony Williams, and Tony has a video for us to watch starting off.
No one knows where or when inspiration will strike, or what will inspire you. My inspiration came while driving. I stopped at a red light and spotted a weathered telephone pole covered with nails and staples. I grabbed my phone and took these pictures. This is my inspiration for black gold. Up from the muck and mire, I emerge in all my splendor. My curves and statuous form stand tall with beaten marks from my master's whip. The marks from childbirth I was forced to bear stretch across my body, only to reveal my inner beauty, bringing the gifts my ancestors gave, black gold. I am the dream and the hope of the slave, from the sound of laughter to the cry of a hungry child. I am black gold. These marks stretch across my body like a road map. Marks from the pain you inflicted with each lash of your whip, and the birth of each child you took from me. As the tears run down my face, these welts and scars I wear only mark the surface. They cannot hurt my core, my inner beauty, the gifts my ancestors gave, my strength and beauty, my creativity, my intellect. I am black gold. I am a fiber artist and paper maker of color, working with indigo. I designed this sculpturally pleated paper gown of kozo paper and quilted buba with gold lining to represent my inner beauty, the gifts my ancestors gave, strength, creativity, my intellect. I am black gold.
Good afternoon. My name is Tony Williams. I'm a fiber artist working with Indigo, and I handmade paper maker. Next, Black Gold was created for a fiber show in South Carolina for the African American folk show in South Charleston. And the call was based on the title of a song by Esperanza, for her last name. But her song is entitled Black Gold. And after listening to it, I really started to reflect on how that music inspired me. And as I said, while driving, I saw a telephone pole and was inspired by the marks that I saw. It was a clear roadmap as to what my ancestors wanted me to see. Next. I am a paper maker that works with Indigo, and I have been exploring those aspects for the past 8 years now. I was introduced to Indigo on a visit to South Carolina for the first float show that I went to, that I was a part of. Not knowing the history of Indigo in South Carolina, I left there completely moved, and it has changed my entire practice. Next. This piece that you're looking at is a piece that was designed and as a part of the Paper on Skin in Tasmania, in Australia. Next. As this piece was sent there also in 2020. It is composed of end papers, which is used for curling of hair in African American traditions. It's what we use to roll our hair in a roller. Next. This piece is inspired by an African tribe where the men dressed in wonderful attire to attract their future wife. Next. This piece was also shown in Paper on Skin. Next. I was asked to be a part of the recommitment of my ancestors. In 2013, 39 bodies were exhumed when constructing a new building in South Carolina. And in 2019, we came together to recommit them. And we were asked to create burial shrouds. And this is one of them. Next. 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 What I didn't know was that the work that I had presented was chosen to adorn the crypt lid. So arriving there, I was really surprised to see my work on top of the, covering all of the ancestors. Next. They decided not to bury all of the pieces. And I was very fortunate in that they chose to keep some of those pieces. And these are currently hanging in the McLeod Plantation in South Carolina. So it is a great honor to be in the big house, overlooking where my ancestors worked in the fields. Next. 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 This piece is called Airing Your Dirty Laundry. And it is a piece that is derived from having a conversation. When you air your dirty laundry, it's put on the line for everyone to see. This piece is designed on a pair of blue jeans. These jeans are covered in Dinka symbols and dyed with indigo and grown here in Cleveland. This was a community project. I created all of the Dinka symbols and waxed the fabrics and set up workshops throughout the city and did the process of dyeing the fabrics. And then they were stitched together and hung. This banner hung from the bridge separating the east and west sides of Cleveland, which is, in Cleveland, that was one of the things that African Americans were on the east side and we did not venture on the west side. So this is an opportunity to really have that conversation and talk about the racial divide. Next. 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 Yeshaka Warrior. In Nigeria, there is a region where the river runs through, and the water goddess Oshun is located. And it is where the essence of Oshogbo is. It is where indigo is, the practice of indigo is taught. Next. Next. I did a residency last year and I did large pulp paintings. And this is some of the work that I created during that time. I started off very loose and gestural. I wasn't real sure what I was going to create. And then these stories started to emerge. And so it's just my work really focuses on my history and celebrating my ancestors and the journey that we have been on. Next. Our celebrations of sorrow and of joy. Next. And this final piece is my headset that I use for everything. It is indigo on Kozo paper critique. Thank you for listening to my story, and I've enjoyed this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony. Those are gorgeous. All right, moving on, we have Gray Caskey talking about their work, Dissenting.
Hi, everyone. I'm talking to you today from Portland, Oregon, and I just want to say what an honor it is to be here speaking. I'm just in absolute awe of Adrian and Tony's work. A little bit of background about myself. I received a BA in Fine Arts with an emphasis in fibers way back in the early 1990s, where I had the privilege of studying with the art quilt legend, Mr. Arturo Sandoval. And during that time, I also focused on art quilts. After college, I shifted my creativity into a graphic design and project management career. And I didn't start back into fiber arts until around maybe 2016, 2017. So I really consider myself an emerging artist at this point. Over the last 2 years, I built a new studio in my home, and thanks to that and the pandemic, I have just completely immersed myself back into my fibers practice. Slide, please. Oops. Sorry, I'll have you back up one slide. So my entrance back into fibers started with these complex interlaced pieces. This piece, titled Wayfinding, is 4 feet by 4 feet, and it's created from overlapping strips of cotton bias. These are all done intuitively with no pre-planning for the pattern. I just kind of see where the piece is going to take me. Slide, please. So currently, I am obsessed with discarded building materials. I source a lot of my materials from a local nonprofit that provides a place for contractors to donate. Here in Portland, any home built before 1940 must be fully deconstructed as opposed to mechanically demolished. And so a lot of these materials end up here for us to glean from. So digging through these piles of materials, looking for interesting shapes and textures is possibly the most enjoyable part of my whole creating process. And this piece, titled Days Between, is about 40 inches by 60 inches and has a 5-inch depth. And it's constructed from scraps of discarded landscaping fabric. So I hand cut and folded and assembled into this dimensional form. I was just really enamored with the luster and transparency of this found material. Reflecting back, I think my fondness for these types of materials comes from spending a lot of time as a child on building sites with my father, who was a contractor, and of course, walking in the aisles of the hardware stores with him. Slide, please. So the piece that we're focusing on today is titled Dissenting, and it is about 24 inches by 12 inches. It is constructed of reclaimed porcelain electrical tubes that I have encased in abaca paper and woven together with thread and suspended from wood. So I'm sure many of you have heard the term knob and tube in reference to old wiring in homes, and these ceramic tubes are just that. They were used in the early 1900s and were inserted in holes drilled through the floor joists, and then electrical wiring was inserted through the tubes, allowing the tubes to insulate the wiring from the wood joists. These, of course, are no longer used, and during demolition, often they're just trashed. They break very easily. So coming across a number of these felt like finding a little treasure trove. They have this really lovely weight and feel to them. I always think of bones when I'm working with them. That might be because I always wrap them in this fleshy abaca paper. One of my best friends is a paper maker, and whenever I'm visiting her in New York, I get to play in her wet studio. If you've never played with paper making at all, I highly recommend. I think Tony will agree. The possibilities are really endless. You can make sheets with the pulp, you can sculpt with it, you can paint with it, you can stencil with it, on and on. So I'm a total novice in paper making, but the short overview is that the pulp from the abaca plant is formed into sheets using a decal box, and then the excess water is removed from the sheets via a press. Slide, please. So each tube is wrapped with the wet abaca paper, and as it dries, it shrinks tightly around, forming kind of a skin. The effect is pretty subtle, but in my view, it's really essential. I'm not sure if it's the process I feel attached to most, this kind of loving wrapping of each little treasure, or if it's the end result. They just feel so much more tactile after I've wrapped them. I often wish the viewer could actually hold them to get the complete feel for the piece, but alas. And then, of course, the tubes are woven together with thread to form the arch. I work in a very limited palette, mostly black, white, and gray. And in this particular piece, I used an ombre effect to represent a fading of sorts. Slide, please. So the piece is a nod to late Justice Ruth Ginsburg. To backtrack a little, I'm usually working on a few pieces at a time. Sometimes working just means I have materials on a table that I'm rearranging or trying some sort of manipulation with. And various ideas might sit there for weeks or months, allowing me to see and contemplate until something strikes me. And then all of my focus gets shifted and poured into that piece until completion. For this particular piece, the half circle arrangement reminded me of Ruth's dissenting collar. And so I started working on ways to permanently hold the tubes in this formation. The completion of the piece coincided with the passing of Justice Ginsburg, and this felt like a lovely tribute to her. I guess upon knowing this is a tribute to her, I hope that you or whoever the viewer is feels a sense of reverence. While you may not be able to feel the physical weight of the piece, my desire is for the viewer to reflect and along with that, empathize with the load that fell on Ginsburg's shoulders for so many years. My work is always about the process itself, the reflection that comes along with the repetition, the exploration of the materials, and just the architecture of the piece. Historically, I have not made political statements in my work. I'm not sure if this is a new direction for me or just a reflection of these challenging times, but apparently it's seeping in. The messages are subtle and maybe aren't even for the viewer at all. I think this is just my current process of trying to make something beautiful despite everything seemingly falling apart around us. But it has sparked something in me, and I am actively working on a few pieces that speak to our current political climate. And especially after seeing Adrian and Tony's amazing work, I'm just really excited to see where this new path may lead me. And that is me and my piece Dissenting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gray. That was awesome. So we're going to enter the Q&A portion. I have two questions for Tony, and I'm going to kind of combine them together. The first one is, what gave you the gold squares? And is the gold on top of the indigo fabric? And the next question, Tony, was, what type of paper do you use?
Okay. The paper that was used for black gold is a Japanese kozo, and the inside of the coat is made out of Chinese josh paper, which is funeral money. It is burned for celebrations and for funerals.
Okay.
So it had a gold square already on it, and the whole thing was dyed in indigo.
All right. And the next question is for Gray. Do you sew the pieces or do you glue them?
So it depends on the piece. The first piece I showed is just interlaced. There's no sewing or gluing at all, just strictly interlaced. The second piece that I showed that were the hexagon pieces, those are folded by hand and then they overlap each other and they're attached with like a little basting stitch, although it's like an acrylic stitch. It's done by machine. It's a machine done stitch. And then of course the dissenting piece is just interlaced with thread to hold that together.
Okay, I have a question for each of you, and I'll make you go in turns. We'll start with Adrian, but do you feel, it's a two-part question, do you feel that artists have a responsibility to society with their work, and regardless of whether it's political or not, but a responsibility in general? And if so, how do you grapple with that? So I'll start with Adrian.
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that as far as my work is concerned, it just bubbles up as a response to what I'm seeing in the outside world. Do I have a responsibility with my art? Well, I think the art is to engage and to help think about and consider the world from different perspectives that they see before them, whether that's one of aesthetics, or in my case, more often, it's to hopefully think about what's out there in the news of the day, as it were. But yeah, maybe that's for each person to define for themselves. If some of it is just the way it strikes me, you know, I was really struck, for example, by the juxtaposition of, you know, the piece that I did called An Incalculable Loss, where the front page of the New York Times was only obits. But that was the day before George Floyd was killed. And those two things are related in a way that I hope that that piece speaks to, and I'm not sure that people think about.
All right, thank you. Okay, Tony.
I think my art has changed and evolved as I've gotten older. I am more inclined not to make pretty things. I'm starting to look deeper at what I'm making and why I'm making it, and what are the overall arching aspects of this journey that I'm on. A lot of my work has definitely taken on this ancestral journey. So I'm really guided by where they're taking me and exploring. So, you know, things of the crises of the day do appear, but they're not the main focus.
All right, thank you. Okay, Gray, what do you think?
Yeah, thanks. This is actually a question that I've been asking myself a lot lately, and that I haven't necessarily come to a conclusion on. But, you know, like I said, in the past, I've kind of been focusing like almost more of the aesthetics and construction of the piece as opposed to a statement. And really over the last year, I've been having to question whether it's my privilege that has allowed me to stay like in this really safe space. And, you know, I do find it kind of intimidating to make political statements, but I think it's probably something that all of us need to be pushing ourselves towards, whether that's within our art or just within our community. So I don't necessarily want to say that there's a responsibility to do it, but I do think it's something that we probably should all be questioning ourselves on and challenging, and making sure that making sure that we are taking advantage of opportunities that we have when we do have a voice.
All right, thank you. Okay, we have another question in the Q&A. Adrian, what adjustments did you make to the knitting machine?
To do what?
I'm assuming to do the wire from the thread to wire.
I didn't have to do any adjustments to the knitting machine. I had to be really careful about the feed because there's no elasticity, so there has to be enough slack to feed the wire through a machine. And of course, different wires have different different ways that they work in conjunction with the machine. And but the machine itself, there's no alteration on the machine itself that I made.
Okay. The next question is for Tony. Does Tony harvest and process his own indigo?
I am currently growing a South Carolina version of indigo. Here in Cleveland, we have a wonderful facility called Praxis Fiber Workshops, and they grow Japanese indigo. And I have helped them in the process of turning that into bats. So yes, I have produced my own indigo here in Cleveland.
Great. How is that variety holding up in Cleveland? With the weather, it likes a more tropical environment.
Yes, it does. It is not as tall as it would be if it were south, but it's growing nicely. It's about to start blooming, and it's just wonderful to see, you know. So
That's
I'm happy
fascinating.
that I'm able to get it to grow here in Cleveland.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's all of the questions in the Q&A. If anyone has entered something into the chat, I cannot, there's a lot of things in the chat, so I can't see it. So if you put it in the Q&A, I can ask it. Do any of you guys have questions for one another?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. I appreciate seeing both of your work. I mean, it's so much more wonderful to see kind of the expansive look at and hear about some of the ideas behind what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it. Yes, and inspiring, just as Grace said, that we can take inspiration from each other.
I agree.
I'll ask a question. As somebody that considers themselves an emerging artist, I would be interested if either of you, I guess, just have any like strong feelings or suggestions on kind of how to keep one's art, the momentum in one's art practice.
Ooh, good question. Still trying to figure that one out. I am a deadline junkie. You know, give me a deadline and I can meet it. I love the challenge of a deadline. I am a lazy procrastinator when I don't have a deadline. It's, you know, it'll get done whenever. But a deadline will give me 100 ideas and I can't get them all done. But just the excitement and momentum of doing that is rewarding to me.
I would agree. Deadlines are definitely a spark. As far as I'm concerned, I was a knitting machine junkie for a gazillion years, and you know, you get to a certain point where I got to a certain point where it felt like I wanted to expand my toolbox and use other approaches, and also not be so confined by what knitting provides, even though the sculptural aspects of knitting are really kind of fabulous. Short rowing and all the stuff that you can do on knitting machines, and you can do also by hand. So I've done different things over the years. I have taught sculptural knitting, which has been great and allowed me to travel. You get a lot of inspiration by your students. I have written for Fiber Art Now magazine. They've now changed hands, so I no longer do that. I have worked on development projects in Peru and Bolivia, where I've actually taught machine knitting. You wouldn't think it's a little like bringing coals to Newcastle, but you know, there are actually people in that part of the world who benefited from that. That was really interesting. And then expanding my toolbox so that when I had a concept, I could express it. And if it took something other than knitting to be able to do that, that I had other things to turn to. And so I've done quilting. I have a bunch of pieces that are quilted. A couple of them were in this show. And now this puzzle thing has taken me in a completely new direction. And, you know, part of it started with this whole idea of missing pieces, right? There there are big holes in what we've got going out there, and the puzzle metaphor really spoke to me, and so I started working with that. So I think keeping things fresh, so that you are inspired to continue to work and not feeling hemmed in by the medium, for example, if you want to do something outside of that. For the puzzles, I've had to learn vector images, which I knew nothing about, laser cutting, which I know nothing about, and so on and so on. So it's a long-winded answer.
Thank you.
Okay, since I mentioned the Q&A, I've got a lot of questions that popped up in here, and unfortunately, we're going to run low on time, so I'm just going to pick a few. One is for Adrian. Have you received any criticism for using the American flag in your work?
Yeah, I received a couple years ago, I received it probably wasn't during the pandemic sometime. I received a really bizarre letter that was almost threatening, and I didn't know what to make of it. And it was, it came from it had the return address of an art center, a local art center. And so I called the director of the art center, and he knew nothing of it. So I sent him a copy of it. But it made me a little like, oh my God, am I the target of something because I'm being critical? But, I also felt that a little bit when I had a flag that I got. You can have flags hung over the Capitol of the US in the honor of something. And I had an American flag flown on the day of the primaries for free and fair elections. And it was sent to me with a certificate. And I hung it out on my porch upside down, which is a sign for distress. And I thought, well, if I'm going public, I guess I'm going really public. So, so again, another long-winded answer to say, not really.
Okay. So let's see. Trying to see which ones I can get to within the next few minutes. Tony, have you explored your ancestry? Your work is so moving, someone says.
I have. After doing, I've gone to South Carolina 4 or 5 times now, and every time I go, it is really interesting that it is a place that I feel so welcomed, connected to, and that made me explore my ancestry, because I was really curious as to, is this where I'm from? And in doing so, I am not from South Carolina, but I do have lineage from North Carolina. So it explains why it has been so moving for me. Yeah.
Well, it looks like we're going to run out of time for a lot of the other questions I see here, but thank you all. And one of the questions was, where can I find more information on these artists? You can go to our website and look at our Excellence in Fibers exhibition. All of these artists have websites, and all of their information is available there. And where can you see their work in person? Well, you can come to the Schweinfurth Arts Center this summer and see all 3 of these works on view for Excellence in Fibers. We'd love to see you guys in the gallery.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being on today's Textile Talk. Gray, Adrian, and Tony, the way you're all experimenting with media is really, really exciting. And it was such a pleasure to hear you speak today. And Devana, thank you so much for bringing these artists to Textile Talks and for being a fabulous moderator. And thank you, audience members, for joining us today and every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. We love bringing you Textile Talks. And next week is A Stitch in Time, the Making of a Legacy Quilt, presented by Harlem Needle Arts and Quilt Alliance. So don't miss it. You can register at SACWA.com/Textile Talks. And if you enjoy our programming and would like to support us, you can do that at SACWA.com/TT Support. Thank you to our fabulous sponsors. I'm going to play their video right now, and have a fabulous rest of your Wednesday, everybody.
Thank you so much.
You all.
Thank you.